Oh, yes, folks. Yes, yes, yes. Good morning, good morning, good morning, or good day. In today's seventh edition of Take Election Seriously, you're invited to join me as together we take a look at the role of Parliament in making and framing of laws, all of which must be superseded by our national constitution. In other words, the Constitution must not be offended by any law, as any proper court of law will declare same unconstitutional, and they will order it to be struck off the books. In the meantime, we will also take a jab at campaign financing and the need for enforceable laws to bring this level of corruption to a stop once and for all, because it is really damaging our democracy. It's really interfering with our democracy. It is important to know that Parliament cannot make any laws that unfairly limit your right to speak freely, for example. You have a right to express your opinions as long as you do not infringe on the right of others by so doing. The Constitution gives each and every one of us that right, and therefore any law which seeks to curtail or infringe on that right is unconstitutional. You see, a constitution is a set of rules and laws that tells how a government ought to be organized and run. Having a constitution does not mean that a nation has a constitutional government. Our conscious citizens know this only too well, as since 1995, we have had a group that have been ignoring the Constitution and all of its provisions to protect the rights of all citizens. A nation has a constitutional government when, of course, the powers of the person or group running the government are limited, and when the individuals who hold office have the integrity enough to influence respect for the tenets of the Constitution. In a constitutional government, the people running the government must obey the Constitution. The Constitution contains ways to make sure that the people in the government obey the limits on their power. Any body of people forming a government that run contrary to the tenets of the Constitution should be recalled, gotten rid of, in other words, once and for all, as a mark of the people's intolerance to this practice. Criminal legal action should even be taken against such elements with the sole intention of making examples of them, and thus set precedents for there being consequences for unconstitutional behavior in public office. People, pay attention. Wake up. Only a dictatorial government has limited powers and makes advances towards commanding the police and judiciary, for example, to become a natural extension of their performance in office. A dictator, therefore, is a person running a government who has unlimited powers to do whatever he or she wants. The question must be asked, how can you have a dictatorial government when you have a constitution? Of course, when people do not pay attention and take responsibility and stand up for their rights, dictators rise up to rule them. The Constitution itself may give the dictator unlimited power. The Constitution may say that the government's power is limited without providing ways to enforce those limits. The limits that are in the Constitution may not actually be enforced. Unprincipled people who never had any association or relationship with integrity may assume office and therefore ignore the tenets of the Constitution quite easily. Now, such unprincipled people should not be tolerated in office, and whenever they are seen to be groping the corridors of the campaign trail to offer and reoffer themselves to public life, they should be rejected. Folks, let's move on now to campaign financing. We who are old enough and were paying attention were all witnesses to a situation where international con men have been brought into Grenada to operate businesses within the short-lived offshore financial services sector. Do you remember? The international community, through the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD countries, they branded Grenada an offshore jurisdiction which did not do enough to prevent money laundering. I have my own views on the OECD and FATF, and them being tools of the colonials and imperialists. That aside, they are running things, and little us would obviously fall prey to their dictates, and whatever they brand us will stick. That's just how the world of economics function. It is no secret, therefore, that the proceeds of First International Bank, which collapsed in the most vulgar of manners, went towards the campaign of the current administration during the 1999 elections. This was attested to publicly by the CEO of that bank, Van Brink himself. What did we hear soon after? A letter signed by the Prime Minister himself, thanking one David Rowe for his contribution to his party, was intercepted and published. The seemingly endless supply of campaign finances has introduced a new and undesirable dimension to the political landscape, to the point where campaign reform is of absolute necessity. We have become a country that answer to the dictates of big money influencers, while the people with a vested interest, that is the masses, the electorate, continue to be pawns in their continuous game of chess. Grenada's prolonged detention back then on the FATF blacklist as a country not doing enough to counter money laundering has maimed Grenada's image abroad. As a means of getting off this blacklist, Grenada was forced to make several concessions which compromised the offshore financial sector, maiming it once and for all. Banks registered here moved from several to one or two in quick order, and to none. Revenues from the sector dropped tremendously, to the point where the government was forced to return to the areas which it had vulgarly turned its back on to sustain economic development. The new method of doing business in Grenada today, with even onshore banks, has become an ordeal. The only thing they don't ask you for is your grandmother will to open an account. These new measures, which have increased the scrutiny of even our local people doing business with our local banks, are viewed by many as something they do not wish to put up with. The government's accommodation of con men and crooks of international disrepute, from whom they derived tremendous benefits, allegedly, for their bid for re-election in 1999, has actually come at a tremendous cost to the way we operate as a people. Now, alternatively, other sources of campaign finances had to be sought, and without going into details, the administration suffers no shortage of ideas as to how to attract such, with the main opposition starved of such oxygen, as they are genuinely not prepared to finance their campaign at just any cost. This shows, folks, a willingness by some within our local political landscape who are willing to do the honorable thing to limit or even extinguish the kickbacks and follow-up influence businesses can have on the running of government. Not to mention if such funders fall under the category of the undesirable or con men. After all of this, do you think you are justified in saying, it is a good thing I do not vote? You better pay attention. You better drink some water, and immediately following that, mind your business. So when the time comes, take elections seriously. Your vote is a vote to put Grenada on track with integrity, law, and order. Please remember, folks, hit the share button and get this out far and wide so that many people can be privy to this, because these historical accounts are pregnant with reality and where we are coming from. Because remember what I've told you, awareness influences change. If you are not aware, you will continue to do the same old, expecting a different outcome. So study ahead. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay well, and remain lifted. Cheers.